Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you are. Welcome to Areopa. Today we have me as moderator, and we have our 94th webinar, which is pretty cool. 6 more and we'll hit 100, which is nice to do. So today we have AJ Kauffmann, who I'm sure everybody knows and needs no introduction because he's been around long enough that everyone knows him. And we've got a quite interesting topic that we have a lot of interest in. We've got huge response and interest in this one today, so this is going to be pretty cool. The REST client module in AL. So the way it works here, I'm sure everybody knows, the mic is muted. We don't have mics. If you have a question, you have a question and answer window. Please ask the question in that window. If it's a question that needs an immediate answer, so for instance, if there's a direction going wrong, I will interrupt AJ to give him your question. If not, I will be writing everything down, and at the end of the session, we will have a QA that I'll pick up and pose to AJ at the very end. So as always, the webinar will be posted on our YouTube channel, which I'm sure everybody knows because you've found this, so you must be in there. And if you haven't, this is the link you need to get to, which I'm sure everybody has because that's how you got here. We have some upcoming, this is the list of upcoming webinars. If you join the mailing list, you'll get reminders for all of these. See quite a few coming up. We're getting very regular now, every second week, with obviously a gap at Christmas time. So just before we get started, a quick thank you to our sponsor, 4Nav, who are making this all work. And I'm going to hand over to AJ now. I like these intros to be fast as possible, get through. AJ, I'm going to hand over the screen.
All right then, well, welcome everybody and thank you for signing up. Today, the topic is about the REST client module. I have briefly touched on the REST client module at the Tech Days conference, BC Tech Days conference back in June in Antwerp. And I got some feedback that I could have talked more about the REST client module. So, well, here we are. My name is Arend-Jan Kauffmann. I'm from the Netherlands and working as a CTO for Lumos 365, a Microsoft partner based in London. I'm also MVP, and yeah, as David said, around for a while. Most people probably know me, maybe some do not, I don't know. And I don't blame you. Started in 2002, back in the days with Navision. So around for 22 years in this world, and I like to blog with deep dive technical blogs. I like to speak like I do here today, or conferences, and I've been a trainer for quite a while. But yeah, since I'm a CTO, I'm actually not doing a lot of trainings anymore. Anyway, so that's enough about me. Let's talk about the REST client. These are the topics that I want to cover today. I want to talk why it actually does exist, what it is, how you should use it, some known issues that I'm aware of and working on, and some upcoming improvements on the, let's say, not the short term, but longer term that I'm also working on to make this REST client even better. So why was it created? Well, the point is, working with the HTTP client in AL code, it is already working nicely, but you always require to write extra code that you have to repeat every time that you use the HTTP client. Well, if you want to do it right, I mean, you can just write something like this, HTTP client.get, but if you do not handle the response from it, if it fails or not, and handle the error conditions, then yeah, you have to do that every time over and over again. Actually, if you don't do it, it's fine, but if it fails, then it fails. You don't. Your users will be presented with error messages, and you have to that you need to resolve anyway. So the basic pattern of the HTTP client is actually this, and you know, you're gonna see this pattern again further in the presentation when we go into the inner engine of the REST client, because that didn't change, but actually the HTTP client is a wrapper, a wrapper around the HTTP client and the other objects. Now, if you have this part, and that is already fine, but if you want to work with JSON or XML content, then you even have extra code that you need to work on. So you need to read your content as a text and then read it into a JSON object or an XML object, etc. And this is something you need to repeat every time over and over again. And I'm sure many of you have already created repeatable code that they can reuse in the solutions you have. But yeah, I was actually inspired by two things. We have in .NET the HTTP client JSON extensions, which is functions like get from JSON and post as JSON. Well, officially are called get from JSON async and post as JSON async. But yeah, those functions are not just calling a web service, they're also transforming the response into JSON for you, so you don't have to do all the plumbing yourself. Another module that inspired me is a third-party module called REST Sharp that I've used many times, and it is a wrapper around the HTTP client in C# for easy calling REST web services, which takes away a lot of plumbing, writing code that you need to do yourself. Now, those two things inspired me to create that REST client module in AL to, well, make your life a little bit easier. If you don't use it, be my guest. If you want to use it, I hope you, your life gets easier. So the REST client module is fully written in AL. It is a community contribution, so I was not paid for it to create it, and everybody is invited to make additions to it. Actually, it has happened already over the past year. We saw some additional stuff or fixes coming in from the community, and that's great. So it is a community contribution, and that means it's open source. It's not specifically my code, it is our code. It has been released a year ago in Business Central 2023 Wave 2. And it encapsulates the HTTP client and the other HTTP objects like the HTTP response, HTTP request message, HTTP content. It's kind of a wrapper around those objects. And the aim is to call web services with, well, as less code as possible. And yeah, the REST client allows you to call a web service with just one line of code. As you will see on next slides, it's probably not the best thing you can do with the REST client, because you need to initialize the REST client, as I will explain later. But yeah, it is possible to call a web service with just one line of code, as you see here in the code examples. And well, with just one line of code, you can get text or JSON right from the REST client, and that makes it very easy to use. You will see a lot of inline coding, as you see here, where the get returns, in fact, a response, and on the response you can call get content, and on the content you can call as text. So everything is inline. And the nice thing is it also supports testing. I will briefly touch on that as well. So the objects in the REST client module, before I dive into code examples, I want to explain what the REST client module exists of. We have a code unit called REST client. That is, of course, at the heart of the module. It's the one you use most. We have objects for the HTTP request message and the response message. I will explain them in more detail. the HTTP content. I will also explain that one in detail. We have an HTTP method enum. I don't think I will touch on that in this presentation, but it speaks for itself. It's just the methods like get, post, put, and patch. We have an HTTP client handler that I will explain to you why that exists and why it is important and why you need it. And we have an interface for authentication. We've already authentication supported out of the box. And I will talk about that one as well, of course. So how can we use the REST client? The REST client can be used without any initialization. However, it is recommended to initialize it before you use it. And that is for a reason. The REST client initialization, initialize function accepts two parameters: an interface HTTP client handler and an HTTP authentication. Now those parameters are optional, meaning that you can call initialize with only the client handler or only the authentication, or with both or without any. So exactly 4 overloads of the same function accepting those 2 interfaces. Now, why is the HTTP client handler important? That's maybe the most important part of the REST client. The REST client is a member or part of the system application. Now, if you call the REST client for the first time in a sandbox, you will get a pop-up message. The extension system application is making a request to an external service. I'm sure you all are used to that message, and you probably just click it away. Yeah, I allow it. But usually it is your app that is mentioned here. The extension, your app, is making a request. But now with the HTTP, the REST client, it is the system application that is asking to be allowed for making external requests. Now, what is wrong with that? The problem with this is that if all apps would be using the REST client, then with one OK here, you enable all other apps to make external requests, especially in a sandbox environment where this message exists to prevent you from doing unwanted external requests. This is dangerous. So this is not a good idea if the system application gets the permission to make external calls on behalf of your app. But yeah, the code lives in the system application. So how do we get around that? Well, that is the first thing that I had to deal with. The other thing is telemetry. If you are using the system application for making the external requests, the telemetry that is related to outgoing requests is not going to your app insights. It's going to Microsoft's telemetry. And you want to catch that yourself in your own app telemetry endpoint, so your own app insights endpoint. So there are actually 2 reasons here to think about a solution to reroute the real outgoing request to your app. And that is where the HTTP client handler comes in. It is an interface, part of the REST client module, and it has only one function. It is the one function is send, and the function send gives you the HTTP client the HTTP request message, and it expects a response message as a return. And what you need to do is to create your own HTTP client handler. As you see here, this is the HTTP client handler as a copy of the same one in the REST client module. So the REST client module already has an example of the HTTP client handler which is the default one, and if you don't do anything, that one will be used. But you need to create your own copy of it. I call this one here my HTTP client handler. Of course, it should be with suffixed or prefixed with your prefix or suffix that you want to use. And then there is this implements HTTP client handler interface, and there is a function send. And here, the only thing you need to do is on that HTTP client that is passed into your code unit, you call the send from the HTTP request message, get HTTP request message, and pass back the response message. Oh, sorry, you get the response message in HTTP response message object, and on the response message parameter, this by var parameter, you set the response message. So only 2 lines of code. But those 2 lines of code are important because now it is your app who is doing or making the actual request. And by adding this to your app, your app will be making the request. So the pop-up for asking permission for your app to make an external request will be only for your app and not for everybody else's. And the telemetry will go to your own app insights. And the only thing you need to do is to create this code unit, and then when you initialize the REST client, you pass in that my HTTP client handler. That's all what you need to do to make use of this. So make a copy and pass it in when you initialize the REST client. Now, when it comes to testing, that is actually the third thing. So it's the first thing is your app gets the permission and not other apps. The second thing is telemetry, but the third thing is also that this enables testing. I realize I have not a screenshot of that, but as you can imagine, if you would just skip the HTTP client.send and you compose your own response message by setting, as you will see later, settings on the response message like the HTTP status code, an error message, invalid content, you name it, all kind of scenarios that you can think of to test with. Well, if you want to test an external service, then of course you need to make an external call. But if you want to test your app, how it responds to not being able to make an external request, handling invalid responses, handling a valid response, handling a different HTTP status code, you name it. If you want to test all these scenarios, you do not have to prepare an external service to send you all these kinds of different responses. You simply, in this client handler, prepare the response message that you want to test your app with, and you skip the HTTP client.send, but you just return false or true for success or not success, and set the response message with a status code, response content, maybe headers, maybe cookies, whatever. And that makes testing very easy with this HTTP client handler. So you have 3 reasons to use this one. Okay, so I think I made my point. Let's move to the other one that you can use to initialize the HTTP client, and that is the HTTP authentication. That is an interface with 2 functions: is authentication required and get authorization headers. Now the the REST client will call the is authentication required, and if it returns true, then it calls the get authorization headers, which is, as you can see here, a dictionary. So that's why it's called headers in plural. And the reason for that is that you usually have only one header, like authorization header with basic or bearer token, or maybe a shared access token. Sometimes web services require more than one authorization header, like an extra key, an API key, or whatsoever. I've seen many examples of that. So this one supports multiple authorization headers, and you're totally free to define what the header name is. Usually it is authorization, but it could be a different name. So you pass it in as a dictionary in your code unit. Out of the box, there are already 3 authentication types. Anonymous, well, that's simple. You don't even have to specify it. It's the default authentication type. If you do not pass in an authentication code unit that implements that authentication interface, then it will fall back onto the anonymous one, and it's simply a code unit that returns false to the function is authentication required. There is a HTTP authentication basic code unit. That one can be used to set a username and a password, and then it will create the basic authentication header for you. So that can be reused for basic authentication. When I did the first release of the REST client, I did not include OAuth at that moment. But then after a couple of months, somebody else in the community created a pull request to add at least OAuth client credentials, which I'm very grateful for. So that one now also exists only for service-to-service authentication flow at this moment, but that can be used as well. So you don't have to make it yourself, to write it yourself. The code unit is there and can be reused. But you can create your own code unit as well, and then just pass it in to the initialized function. So apart from the initialize function to pass in the authentication and the client handler, there are a number of other properties that you can set as part of the initialization. You can set a default request header, either a text or a secret text, and that default request header will be included with every request that is sent with the same REST client instance. So that is set once and sent multiple. You can set a base address. Usually on the HTTP client, I don't know if you have ever used the base address on the HTTP client. As it is today, that is useless, because your requests that you do, either with a request message or a get or post, it still requires a full qualified HTTP address. You cannot use relative addresses, but with the REST clients, you can use relative addresses. You will see an example later on what I mean with relative address, but you set once the base address and then you use in your further request relative addresses. The reason why it does not work with the HTTP client in AL by default is, well, in my opinion, a wrong implementation of the .NET objects in AL, and I hope Microsoft's going to fix that sometime in the future. You can set a timeout, must be greater than 0, otherwise you will get an error message. You can add client certificates that will be sent with every request, especially when an external service requires mutual TLS authentication. Honestly, I have only come across one API so far in my in the last couple of years, so it's not used a lot of times, but it's a function on the HTTP client, so I included it. You can set a user agent header. Sometimes external services want to know the user agent. Business Central is not adding that out of the box. You can add it yourself. You will see an example of that. You can set an authorization header. So apart from the authorization code unit, if you have a static authorization header, like an API key, you don't have to create that in a code unit. You can also call set authorization header with a value, and it will be reused for every request. And you can also set the response cookies option that if there is a response that includes cookies, that will then be used in every subsequent request. That one, use response cookies, is an upcoming feature, by the way, because it is not in the current version that is under construction. Well, how do you use the REST client? My recommendation is that you build it one time, you keep an instance in your code unit, and you reuse that instance for subsequent requests. Many times, the HTTP client is used to make multiple requests to an external server. Now, instead of recreating that client in memory every time for every request, you better keep one instance that you initialize one time and you reuse that. You could even keep it in a single instance and then reuse it over time. That is fine as well. Behind the scenes, the Business Central server is actually doing something similar. So this code snippet you see here is a client builder that I use to initialize the REST client with the client handler, the one that takes over the actual send and make sure the telemetry goes to my app, and the authentication for Azure Graph in this case. And I set a base address to the graph base URL. So this is a one-time setting. It returns the REST client from the build procedure. So it's a small code unit that only builds and initializes the REST client. Then how I'm using this is here in a code unit that connects to the application graph, the Azure application graph. I have this graph REST client as a global variable. As you can see, I have 12 references to it. So I'm reusing the global variable over and over again in this code unit. Now here I have an initialize function that I call every time that I go for an outgoing request, and to make sure it is initialized, so I exit immediately when it's not, when it is already initialized. Otherwise, I set the graph REST client to the one that is built from that builder code unit. In this case, I also had a progress dialog, but it's not important here, and then set initialize to true. Now, then we have one small function here that makes a call. This code unit had many functions to call to the Azure, but it's just taking one. And I call the graph REST client as the global variable, the get as JSON. And as you see here, this is a relative URL. The base URL has already been set in that other code unit. It doesn't have to be another code unit, by the way. It could be part of this code unit, but okay, I put it in a different one. But what is important is that base address is automatically used to add this relative address to. So combined, it will have the full qualified URL. That makes it easier. You don't have to specify this many times. You have relative addresses here. And yeah, then it gets back the JSON in my JSON response, and I do something with a get JSON token, but that is JSON handling. This is out of scope, of course, for this session. Before I go into other code examples, I want to talk about the HTTP content object and the request and the response message objects, and then we go into the actual calling. The HTTP content object, it supports all relevant content types that I could think of, like text, binary, JSON, XML, you name it. It's very easy to create an HTTP content object. It will automatically set the content type header based on the content. You probably know that the HTTP content object usually has a content type header with a default value of text/plain. And you need to remove that content type header, and then you can set it to for example, application JSON or whatever it is that you want to send as content. People are always struggling with that because they try to set the content type header on the wrong place or forget to remove it before they set it, etc. This HTTP content object is handling that for you. And you can use functions to read the content as a strong type. So you don't need to convert it to JSON or XML or text or binary. It supports functions to do the conversion for you. So here are a couple of examples. This first one here, HTTP content.create hello world, sets a text content, and the content type header will be text plain. When you create a text but it actually contains XML or JSON, then you can specify an alternative content type header. You don't have to set it with another line of code. You just add the other parameter. Hey, this is not text/plain because it cannot tell from the text. Of course, you're passing in text, so it is text. But you know it's text/XML, so you pass in that one. Now, if you pass in not text, but you pass in a XML document, then it will automatically set the content type header to text/XML. If you pass in a JSON object, it will automatically be application/JSON. If you pass in a template, it will automatically take the content of the template, the binary content, and set the content type header to application/octet stream. But hey, if there was a PDF in a template, of course the code would not recognize that, but you simply add that as the parameter here. Hey, this is not octet stream, this is application/PDF. So with this, we have a very easy way to create the HTTP content and set the content type header to the correct value, which I think covers 99% of the cases that you are using the HTTP content for. But if you have some other scenarios, you be my guest, you can set the content type header with a special call if you want to. And if you want to set the content encoding, you can do that as well. Now, mind that this one is called set content type header, and this one is called add content encoding. The reason is that the content type header does not allow multiple values, while the content encoding does allow for multiple values. So when you call add content encoding, it's not replacing the header content encoding, it is adding a value to it, so it can be multiple values. Sometimes it's, for example, deflate/gzip. Well, that is possible, but set content type header is going to replace the current content type header to the specified value. If you want to get the real underlying HTTP content object, you can get it, you can grab it from the code unit, and there you are in the AL HTTP content type object. If you want to read the content directly, then you have multiple functions. You can read it as text. You can read it as a secret text. You can get it as a JSON, which returns a JSON token. If you want to have a JSON object, you simply add as object or as array, if that is the case. So I only have the JSON token return here. Let me know if you would like to see as object instead of adding that yourself to the code. XML document can be read automatically. You can get an in-stream. You can even get the full blob in a template. So all of these functions are available out of the box, making it extremely easy to read the content from an HTTP content code unit. All right, having said that, let's look at the basic commands. Here we have two commands, and the two commands do the same thing, but as you will see later on, they actually do make a small difference. The first one is by getting the response message back from the REST client call to the GET. So the GET URL returns the response message, which is the code unit response message. Now on the response message code unit, you can call the GET content function, which returns the HTTP content code unit, and then you can call that as text or as JSON or as XML or whatever you have. You can also make that a one inline code. So you do the GET URL, you call on the return, because that is a response message code unit, you call the GET content, and that is the HTTP content code unit, so you can call as text immediately. So in that case, you even don't have to specify those two variables. You can just go with one line of code. For the post, it's the same story, but now you need to send data. So the post is sending data, of course, so sending content. Well, you start with creating content. In this case, in this example, it is text that contains JSON, but you can, as we have seen, pass in a JSON object here or whatever you want. Then we call the post with the URL and the content. And then again, we get out the content as text, which could also be JSON or whatever. And if you want to do that in a one-liner, then we call, instead of the HTTP content here, the 2 lines, we just say HTTP content.create, because the create returns the HTTP content object, so it can be used as a pass-through parameter to the post function. So all inline, making it again extremely easy. You do not have to define response message and HTTP content code unit. If you have more advanced scenarios, we still have a request message object. You can set headers on the request message object, extra headers only for that request. You can set cookies, upcoming feature being worked on at the moment. And you should use that not with a get or a post, because on the request you set the method, is it is a get or a post, and then you use the generic send method. Behind the scenes, the post and the get are actually creating a request message for you and using the generic send method anyway. The REST client is not using the get or the post function of the HTTP client. The reason for that is behind the scenes in C# exactly the same happens. It is not that the get or the post function does something special. It is just sugarcoating for creating and composing a request message and using the send method. Then we have the response message. That is returned by all generic methods. So the get, the post, there is a put and a patch command. They're all returning a HTTP response message. The send methods, of course, as well. And in the response message, you have the HTTP status and the reason phrase. I will show you that in the code on the next slide. The response headers are in there as a property. The cookies being worked on. You can have the content as the HTTP content code unit and an error message in case there was an error condition. All those properties can also be set by code. So that is different from the response message in AL, the underlying object in AL, where you can only read the properties. And this code unit can also set them. So for testing purposes, you can completely compose a response message with the scenario that you want to test your application with. Now, when we talk about error handling, this is the send request at the heart of the REST client. I showed you the basic pattern in one of the first slides. Now, the basic pattern is in fact here as well. We start off with calling the is authentication required, and if that is the case, then we authorize the HTTP request message. So this one is going to call the get authorization headers function on the authentication interface and add the headers to the request. Then we get that base pattern. The handler, that is the one that goes to the interface, hopefully your app, send on the HTTP client, get their HTTP request message will be passed in, which is the code unit that has the underlying request message that need to be sent, completely prepared. You can inspect it in your code if you need to. And the response message you want to get back. Now, if that one fails, then there could be two reasons. If it comes back as a false, there could be the reason that it was blocked by environment. So that is the first thing that is being tested here. Then you get an error message, hey, it was blocked by the environment. If it was not blocked by the environment, but it still failed, then there was another reason. I do not know the reason here in the code. There could be no internet connection. Maybe the URL was incorrect and it could not find a DNS, or couldn't find an IP in the DNS. Maybe DNS was not accessible. Maybe the server was down. Maybe the server had an error, did not respond, whatever. I don't know. There could be many reasons. So the only thing that I can tell here is there is a connection error. I did not get a response from the server. That is what he's telling you. So he's setting that as an error message here. There is a connection error, and he sets the error message on the response message and exit false. So he's not raising that error, he's setting that as a false. So that is handled in the get function and the post function later on. If that is false, then raise the error message. Then the next one is the test on the get success status code. Now, in that case, when we are on that line, we actually did get a response. Now, you can see here that in that case, I do not return a false. There's no exit false. Only if it was not a success status code, I return the error message in the response message. And the response message does have the is success status code set to true or false, but I'm not returning false or true because the send request returns only false in case it did not get a response. But in case it did get a response, then I'm not going to judge here in the code if the response was invalid or not. There was a response and you need to handle it yourself. I mean, the response could be in the 200 series, which meaning it was okay, but maybe the response was you are not authorized, or maybe the response was throttled down, I have too many requests, or maybe there was an internal server error. I do not know, and I do not want to handle all the different situations here. So it returns a true, that it got a response, but you still need to test for the success status code yourself in your code to find out if you got a successful status or not, and then act accordingly. So that's why it returns true in all other situations. Now, when we look at get and post as JSON, we have two options here. And now we're going into the difference between the get and post and getting. I said to you, there's a small difference in getting back the response message or use a one-liner. This is a one-liner here. We're getting and posting with the basic command. It gets the URL, and on the response message that the get returns, you get the content. You say, hey, give me that as a JSON and return it as an object. And when you post it, you say, okay, I post it and I want to create the JSON object as content. get a content, blah, 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 same thing. Now we can use a simpler function for that, which is just a wrapper around the same thing. We have the get as JSON and the post as JSON. Now, the get as JSON and the post as JSON are in fact calling the get content and the as JSON for you instead of doing it yourself. But there is a difference between the get and the get as JSON, and that is this part. If we have that get, then we actually, you didn't see it in the previous screenshot, but here I have added it as you should do it. We need to test the get a success status code, because otherwise we might not have any content. So we need to test the success status code and handle, and here I just raise an error, but maybe you have more advanced error handling like logging and returning. I don't know, it's up to you. But this one, and I do it here in the get as JSON, I'm actually already at this level, assuming that there is no error. So what happens in the get as JSON function, it is doing that get a success status code for you and giving you the error. So that is the difference between the two. So why would you bother? In case this fails, there is no success status code, then you get an error message. You could even catch it with a try function. Now the point is that if you call send, that is in fact what you call the get. We get back in, we get into this one here. And here we also have a set error message and it returns false. Now the point is that this function is actually not testing for that false. So there could still be an error message. It's not handling that very gracefully. And I will come back to that in the next slide with an idea how to handle it in a much better way. And I want to have your feedback if you like that idea. But yeah, it's just something you need to know, that the get as JSON works, is powerful. And if you trust your external service, by all means use it, but do know that it handles the success status code for you and errors the errors give you an error message. That is just part of the deal, because yeah, you are not handling it yourself in your code. Okay, so before I get into that ID that I have, I want to address a few known issues with the REST client. At this moment, working with secret headers is an issue. It works. It does not work correctly because the way how it was implemented on the request message is, let's say, different from what I expected. It appears that headers and secret headers behind the scenes are kept in two separated lists. And for that reason, we have different functions to deal with secret headers. I didn't see that coming, so I wrote a couple of functions that do not work nicely with secret headers. So that needs to be fixed. Actually, the code is already finished for that, and I am gonna create a PR for that anytime soon. Same goes with cookies that has been added in, I think, wave 1 this year, so that needs to be added as well in case you need it. The code for that is also ready. May I say that the way how it works with cookies is maybe even better than the standard implementation. But hey, anyway, that's going to be available soon, somewhere in the next couple of weeks. I'm going to create a PR for that. I hope Microsoft can backport it to the current version, because the system application is now already on version 26, but you may want it to have in 25. So let's see if we can manage that. Now then to some improvements that I'm working on, and the most important one is maybe for now the collectible errors. So yeah, of course.
Just let you know, you got 10 minutes, and there's only 2 questions now, and they shouldn't take long, so go for it.
All right. So, well, I was actually on my last slide now.
Perfect.
So,
Perfect. I'll leave you alone.
yeah, thank you. So, I'm thinking about having collectible errors. So the idea is that in the REST client, I'm going to raise the errors. So let's go back in here. This one, instead of setting only the error message, it's also going to really give you the error. And then as I pass it in as a collectible error. The same goes in this function here. Instead of doing a normal error, I'm going to create a collectible error. And what can you do with that? If you call it in a function that is marked with error behavior collect, then you can call the GetAsJson as object. It is not going to fail. It will not raise any error, but it will just exit. And then you can test if there are any collected errors. Then we can test in the get collected errors if there was a error blocked by environment, connection failed, HTTP status code, or invalid JSON. That will be part of the custom dimensions. I'm thinking of having an enum for that. So in the custom dimensions, you will have the enum value and the name of that error. So in debugging, you can also see that that error message nicely. And then based on the error type, you can act. So if there was a blocked by environment, you can give the user a message, hey, you blocked outgoing request, please enable it. Or maybe you want to enable it yourself from code. If the connection fails, you can give him another error message, or maybe log it. If there is an HTTP status code like for, 27, 29, like too many requests, you can say, oh, I'm gonna have a pause for 10 seconds and then redo the request. If there was invalidation, maybe you want to, I don't know, handle it differently, like show an error message, log it. I mean, by having collectible errors, it's up to you how to manage it. Now, if you do not handle the collected errors, if you do not add this marker here, then by all means, be my guest, it's gonna show the error anyway. So it's not mandatory to use it, but with collectible errors, I give you the power to catch the errors. I would say in a almost C# way, like try catch. I want your opinion on this. Please give feedback if you like this or not. I don't know if you can have some messages or maybe in a Q&A, but if you think, hey, this would be very useful, then please let me know. I'm also working on endpoint management, meaning we can, instead of doing everything in code, we have a small module there where you can set, where the end user can configure API endpoints, the URL, the authentication type, etc., and then have the REST client initialized based on the endpoint settings. So dynamically configuring the API settings. And I'm also working on support for the other OAuth authorization flows, like the authorization code, the grant authorization, code grant flow, or device code flow, maybe, if that makes sense. But I need to talk to Microsoft about that one because I have the code finished already, but it is introducing, let's say, a few other techniques that are not part of Business Central at the moment. So I first need to have the green light before we can move on with that one. With that, I think we have time for Q&A. So David, shoot.
Yeah, so the first question is from Adnan Shishich, and simple one, I think straightforward. He says, as it also accepts XMLs, I suppose this can also be used for external SOAP web services?
Definitely, yes. It is meant for external web services, and yes, you can use XML.
Okay, great. The second one is from Dmitry Katson. So he says, thank you for the webinar. I have a question about how to set the content type multiform data and send a file there. When I tried to implement this, I had to build form data content by myself by building the payload with content disposition form. And then he posts a link back to the Never Stop Learning website.
Yeah, great question, Dimitri. Thank you. So, yeah, I need to add that to my list because creating multi-part form data is a pain in the neck, I know, and sometimes you need it. So you also, then you need to create the complete data yourself with the disposition, the separators, etc. And it would be, I guess, very convenient if you just can add, can have functions like add content, and it does all the hard work in the plumbing for you. So that makes a lot of sense. And I'll add that to my list of upcoming features, hopefully before the next version. That's what I aim for. Thank you for that. That's
Next one is Michael Nielsen, who is from Fornav, our sponsor. So, Michael, thank you to you. He just says, thank you, AJ, for a fantastic presentation. And thank you, Michael, for you guys supporting us. That's really great of you. So the next one is
thank you, Michael.
Yeah, Jose Joachim Magiral. I can't get the rest of that name, sorry. Batch of questions. Does it work with SOAP? I think you already answered that, so that's yes. Does the order body headers, etc., matter if you need to set them?
So let me answer the first, but does it work with SOAP? Theoretically, I guess it could, but the point is it's called a REST client for a reason. Most APIs are REST, and SOAP is different. So it's not a SOAP client out of the box. You would need to set the content, the XML content, and all the headers, the SOAP envelope, everything yourself. And then a SOAP endpoint could be treated as a REST endpoint sending an XML SOAP envelope. That will be fine. Then it can be used, but it's not supporting any functions to create SOAP envelopes and SOAP bodies and have the correct headers for SOAP. Unfortunately not.
Okay, the second question was, does the order body headers, etc., matter if you need to set them?
Sorry, I didn't get a question. Did the order body?
Does the order body headers, etc., matter if you need to set them?
Oh, no, they don't. So if you have to set headers, you can set them in any order. But remember that you have content type headers on the content object and request headers on the request object, the same way as it is in C#.
Okay, next one. You say that the HTTP client is faster if only created once. I tried it in 1,000 loop with a global var and local var, namely creating 1,000 times the HTTP client, and it was way faster than creating it just once. What can that be?
Well, I know that I guess in the early days of the HTTP client, it was recreated every time. Now, today in the code of the server, they're actually reusing HTTP client instances. Mm-hmm. So even if you create it as a local variable behind the scenes, it gives you the same instance as before. So that is, you actually do not have any. For performance, not any advantage over one over the other. I'm surprised if having local variables would be faster than global and reusing the global. I would really like to see that scenario. I would expect it works roughly, just have roughly the same performance. So if it is way faster, then I really want to know the scenario.
Okay, so you need more information to follow that up.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yes.
All right, last question is from Christian Broinlich, and I think it's a bit of a duplicate of what you already answered for Dimitri, but I'll read the question anyway. Probably not the first intention of the REST client module, but I still wanted to ask what other possibilities there are to simplify the upload of a binary file for even multiple files with multi-part form data, so that, for example, the boundary value is calculated automatically. See the official MS docs. And again, there's a link.
Yeah, that is, yeah, this a similar question than well, from Dimitri.
Yeah.
Yeah, as far as I know, the boundary value does not have to be generated. I think it can be a generated value. Does not really to be calculated, if I say that correctly from top of my head. But yeah, I agree. Even if it has to be calculated somehow, it needs to be part of that HTTP content. Where you can create maybe a special type of it, a multi-part HTTP content object. That makes all the sense, and I'm definitely going to look into it. You guys just gave me another reason to have some short nights.
Yeah, okay. So I think I'll just ask for everybody else, because I think there's a question people probably want to contact you following up. Are people able to contact you with a couple of these questions?
Absolutely. Just go to my blog, Kauffmann.nl, or ping me on LinkedIn or Twitter or Discord. Yeah, usually respond quickly. It's fine.
All right, great. Thanks, AJ. There was a lot in there. I think this is going to be one of those things that people are going to watch this, and that YouTube is going to be hit pretty hard with people refocusing on the bits and pieces, which is why this is so fabulous, that everything is immediately recorded. Tomorrow, Luke will have this published, and everybody can read it. So again, everybody, AJ, I think that's it for you. You good?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
Thank you.
So
Thank you all
again,
for watching.
Thanks everybody that we have the seminars coming out. Please subscribe to the mailing list. It's the easiest way to find out what's going on. And the easiest way is just go to areopa.academy. Simple website. When you go on that, that website is very, very simple now. It simply pops up all the YouTube recordings right there on the first click. Nice and simple. You'll see the list of all the new events. And of course, thanks to Fornav. Mikhail, great to see you listening in on the session, and Fornav, thank you so much for everything that's going on and where we've moved to. So thanks everybody for joining, and goodbye. Thanks everybody.
Thanks all. Bye.